welcome to this preview of this month's ABA Inside Track Book Club for Look Me in the Eye by John Elder Robison. Now, for those of you who are new to the show, once per season we do a patron-only book club. So this is only available for our patrons on patreon.com/ABA Inside Track at the $10 and up level. But if you're interested in hearing more about what we do in this book club, we thought we'd give you this little preview to kind of get a taste of what the full discussion is like. If you hear it and say, you know what, I want to hear the end of this discussion, plus get access to all of our other older book clubs that we've done, as well as 2 CEs for each of the book clubs that you listen to, well, head on over to patreon.com/ABA Inside Track right now and subscribe at the $10 or $20 level to get access to all of those episodes, including the one you're about to hear the introduction of right now. We really enjoyed this book. We had a lot of fun talking about it. We think it really added a lot to our sort of thought process of working with clients as individuals rather than as, say, problems to be solved, right? Not something that any good practitioner wants to do. We thought this was a really good book to learn about experiences that we ourselves have not had to kind of increase our knowledge of our client base. So we hope you find this preview fascinating and want to hear even more, and we hope you enjoy it. Hey, everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track's Book Club. Thank you so much for joining the Behavior Analytic podcast that talks about mostly research articles, but every season we pull out one of these books. And for our patrons, we get together and we share our thoughts on a book related to the field. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and I am joined by my book club regulars. Anybody, I swear, I have some.
I'm waiting for Alan.
Oh, well, okay. I'm Alan Haberman.
Hey, Alan. Alan's like the most book club of regulars.
He's the book clubbiest of all.
Of all the
I'm
book
the
clubbers.
book club guy. Quotes.
So you get to go first. Then it's me, Jackie.
And it's me, Diana.
Oh boy. Well, if you can you can tell everyone is just coming back from a long day in the coal mines, which is weird because you think we'd have better jobs as BCBAs, but I don't know. You get a job you can get these days. And we are here to talk all about the book voted on by patrons, Look Me in the Eye by John Elder Robison, who I think in everything we've published so far, we called him Robinson, but that is wrong.
Just the one time, I think.
Oh, just one time? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
After reading his memoir, we know how to spell and say his last name. So this was, for our February choices, it was sort of a pop psychology month was the theme. So we had a couple different options of things that were a little less behavior analytic, a little lighter, kind of a nice break in these cold winter months. And Look Me in the Eye won, and it is a memoir. The subtitle is My Life with Asperger. So we've never done a memoir, so this is going to be an interesting kind of change of pace. But I think if we see this book as, you know, an example of one person's, life story in which they had a disability that was never identified until they were fully adult, and we think about it as a time capsule of what different individuals were treated like in the 60s and 70s. And also, I promised Jackie we will talk for a long time about her favorite band, Kiss, who makes a really long chapters all about them. We're going to talk all about 70s glam and horror rock or whatever Kiss counts as.
I want to say that this was my choice of book,
Mm-hmm.
and I picked it for a very specific reason.
Okay.
And so...
It was Kiss, I just said that.
It was not. It was because up until this point, I had read very little about the perspective of what life is like for an autistic individual or for an Asperger's individual, right? So even though I went through 3 years of a master's program, 7 years, it felt like, but I don't think it was really 7. I think it was like 4 years of a doctoral program, right? And this is not discrediting where I went to school, right? But I think the perspective of our client and this specific perspective of the author being autistic, right, and moving through the world with these deficits, right, and strengths, I think can provide a really, I think, different, more broader lens for clinicians to conceptualize what their clients might be going through, right? So this is something that I had not thought of that my experience moving through the world might be like completely vastly different than the clients that I serve moving through the world, just based on, like even like auditory processing, right? Visual processing, what I find to be annoying versus not annoying, right? I think I sometimes, as a younger practitioner, assume that we all had the same experience, which is 100% not true, right? I'm hoping that nobody has that sort of close-mindedness now. I think we're doing better.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty common skill that one develops, is the idea of, oh, wait a minute, everything's not the same as what I'm doing. Oh,
Right.
wait, like that's maybe not everybody, but it does.
But
seem
that
like a
doesn't
common
mean
one.
people generalize it to their professional practice. Well.
Right.
That's very true.
100%
Very true.
right. So it's actually funny that I did this work on myself outside of my professional practice before it even dawned on me to think about it within my professional practice, right? So, and so I think for me, I have been trying to read a lot of these books and get a lot of perspectives on what the autism experience is. So when I'm teaching, because I don't have autism, right, and I don't know what that experience is, I can use those experiences from people who've, who live it, to give a more well-rounded and accurate depiction of what I should be doing as a clinician. And so this book, we had the author of this book come talk to our campus about neurodiversity in the classroom at Regis, and I found his what he talked about in that. It was very brief. It was only an hour discussion, like very eye-opening. And so I wanted to read this book to see how I could incorporate how his experience is probably very similar to other experience, maybe not the same, right? But I think there are a lot of themes, like common themes, that come along with having a diagnosis of one thing or another, right? Because you have to hit all those traits, so you might experience life differently than I have. And so I can use that then to inform not only my practice, how I view my clients, but how I might modify treatment plans because of what I now know about the experience, and how what I think should be something is not necessarily what should be, right? So that's why I chose this book. That was very long-winded. I'm so sorry.
So you chose to put it in the poll.
Yeah, but I knew it was going to win.
You knew it was going to win, huh? What did you do? Who'd you pay off?
I paid all the people off. But yeah, so that's why I chose this book. I did not know that he was brothers with Augustine Burroughs, who is the author of Running with Scissors, so very talented family.
You would not know that because Augustine Burroughs is not the same name as Robison.
Right,
and you have to have,
he changed his name.
He's changed his name, but you wouldn't necessarily know it just from looking at the at the titles.
No, and then they say forward by Augustine Burroughs, and they don't say brother of the author.
Yeah. So
have you guys read Running with Scissors?
I have. It's really good.
I was disturbed by the title. That is not what you're supposed to do with scissors.
I've always
and
been
I
quite disturbed by
the
title and haven't been able to read it.
No,
for
I actually
that
read
reason,
it. It's a very good book. It's a memoir of his childhood. So
his seems even more traumatic.
Yep. So his memoir is much more traumatic than this memoir. But it's interesting to see the parallels, right?
Yeah.
For their common experience, but also their vastly different experience, right? Because John was much older and left the house when Augustine was young.
Yeah.
So
I'm gonna read it.
It's really good.
If we ever do a movie night, we might watch the film because it got.
Oh, I like that.
There's a movie too.
It had Alec Baldwin, Annette Bening.
What was Alec Baldwin?
The alcoholic father.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Sorry, Alec.
I don't know. Reading this memoir, I did not get the sense that their father was an Alec Baldwin type. I don't know.
Well, and then Brian Cox, the guy, I don't know if you know him as an actor.
Love Brian Cox, yeah.
He's the unorthodox therapist that we hear about in this book. So,
who's Brian Cox?
Yeah.
What has Brian Cox been in? Isn't he on the Succession show? Or is that somebody else?
I don't know, but this is beyond the scope of what we're talking about.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think from my perspective as a professor and a clinician, I think it's important and vital if you're going to be working with the autistic population to get their experience, right? And so I think a lot of the things that we can pull from this book can help us understand where understand where, there might be some resistance to how we might prescribe some treatments, right? And see it from a different angle and maybe make some changes or not, but at least be able to have that discussion.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think to your point, Jackie, certainly we want to get the perspective from our client as best we can, but depending on the age of the client, the communication abilities of your client, it's not necessarily going to be as direct. So sources like this, where you can sort of just like quickly digest the experience of someone, is a perspective that you can sort of add to your knowledge base, and it can allow you to sort of think of questions and think of, I think what I found fascinating about the book was the idea of not just, oh, this is the perspective of someone, an autistic individual, so much as this is the perspective of an autistic individual and their life, not even their full life, because he has lived many years after this book. He is still alive to this day, has written more books since then. But the scope, because so many of us, I think, we work with a client for a year or 2 or 3, and then they move on to another school, or they move on to another company, or they move. And it's sort of like, well, that was my moment in time. Or we each get really good at, like, I'm great with preschoolers, or I'm great with adolescents, or I'm good with pre-vocational skills. And we lose the sense of people as organisms that grow and live and have many, many experiences for a long time. And we are only a bit player in their overall life. And we're hoping to be like an important bit player, but at the end, we're just a small chunk of everything that's going to happen in their life. And I think sometimes it's hard to take that into perspective, because usually when we're working with a client, we're the star of the movie,
Right.
But we're not remembering that they're going to do a lot more beyond us.
Yeah. All right, let's get into it.
Yeah. Well, we usually start kind of, with overall thoughts. Like, so Alan, were you familiar with this book, or Diana, were you familiar with this book before? I just remember seeing the cover at like Borders back when that was a bookstore and being like, what's this book about?
Oh no, Barnes.
I'm leaving. This looks like an Oprah book club. I don't know if I want to read this, was sort of my impression years and years ago. I think when this book kind of first hit, it was on all the shelves with the kid with the scrunchy face.
I don't remember seeing it in a bookstore.
I never saw it in the bookstore either.
I remember reading the prologue at some point, because that like opening line of "Look me in the eye, young man." I'm like, every behavior analyst needs to read that line with like, it is not something we need to move beyond that as our like go-to for like joint attention and things like that. But I quickly realized I hadn't read much more of this. But it was, I like that it was very frank, and I think that he as an author does a very good job of being upfront about the fact that I don't remember exactly any of this, but I knew these people really, really well. So I may not have it exactly right, but I have it right. Like, it is as good as you're going to get, and it's all true. And then I really like how sometimes he's very frank about how he, at that point in his life, would have described a situation internally or to himself, like how Varmint wasn't damaged. You mean your little brother wasn't injured?
Right.
But just like using language that we wouldn't consider typical of how we talk about, especially an adult talk about their younger sibling and things like that. So there are just lots of moments like that in the book that are really, really strong in presenting that, like, I am still an author who is atypical. I am neurodivergent. I am not the type of person that you will have interacted with or seen the point of view from often. And you need to remember that. And he does a good job of dropping that in there occasionally.
One thing I loved, and I can't forget about it, is when they talked about how when he was younger and the grown-ups were saying that somebody had died and he had laughed.
Mm-hmm.
And then they said, "Oh, you're so evil for laughing." Mm-hmm. But what he did then, I thought was like so like mind-boggling, was that he's like, "This is what I was thinking. Mm-hmm. Oh man, that's sad, but I'm not too sad because I don't know them. That's all how we feel." Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right? Let's be honest. And then he's like, "Oh, I'm glad it wasn't my family. Oh, I'm glad it wasn't my brother. Oh, I'm glad it wasn't me." Sigh of relief, laugh. Like that, I was like, of course that would happen, right?
Yeah.
I just thought that was so like poignant.
Yeah. And I like how he puts it back. And he's like, I think it's hypocritical when people have this outpouring of like extreme emotion for someone they didn't know.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
that just doesn't make sense to me. And I think it's disingenuous. And it's like, well, okay, maybe I'm not going to disagree with you there. Sometimes it is.
Yeah.
I think one of the strengths of this book as a memoir, because when it was picked, I was a little nervous because it's not a science book in the way we've read other books before, and certainly there are a lot of chapters here that I look at my notes and I've shared my notes with folks. I've seen them. I write everything I can think of, and I had chapters where I was like, he's writing about making not video games. He's writing about making toys. There's we're not going to talk about this for 30 minutes. Like, even us, and we're good at tangents. But I loved how it was, life moments interspersed with those chapters, like the one you were describing, Jackie, of sort of just like quick tangent. I want to talk about how I think of this, or how I process this event, or what I think of when people, tell me this fact, or how I feel about being Aspergian, as an adult. So like these great chapters that just almost are like, the Saved by the Bell timeout. I'm going to just pull it back. I'm going to describe a feeling, or I'm going to describe a thought process I had. And I thought those were so fascinating. I felt like I gained so much. It was almost like the equivalent of, I wish everyone could do that when you're doing like an intake or an interview. They could be like, time out 1 second. I'm going to describe this really salient process I go through when this happens. It's like, oh, thank you for doing my job for me. This is amazing. Like all of this great, report on your private events, and it's all very clear. And, your language is so precise. This is so great. Like, I feel like I know you in a way that I wouldn't have just from reading your anecdotes, or just from hearing some like general statements about how people reacted to you. So that format I thought really made the book so fascinating, and really fly too, because like every chapter something different happened.
And he also, he doesn't have the vocabulary for it, but he talks about learning to mask and learning like, oh, I had learned by this point in my life that people expected me to behave this way. And I was much more successful when I did this. So I did it all the time. Like that's a great like report of internal events and growth and
also a little bit of sadness too, though, that he had to mask, right? So I think that's something else for us as clinicians that we can pull from this book.
Yeah,
is that it may appear that our clients are doing better because they're hiding their behaviors that they want to engage in, but maybe it's time for us to kind of take a step back and accept those behaviors, right? For just behaviors that they are, right? And
how some of his like his pranks, he never directly ties it to some of the like extreme trauma that he had. He talks about like, I was angry because I didn't have any friends. I think you maybe were also possibly angry because of your alcoholic father, but I don't know. I can't speak for you. You're the author of this book, but like your pranks get really extreme at the same time that you're reporting, these other things. And I think there's self-awareness on how he's talking about this. Like at the time, I wouldn't have connected these things, but maybe now as an adult who's processed some of this, I'm tying these two things together in time and letting you as the reader make your own judgment.
I know I struggled a little bit, and I know we're going to probably end up talking about it, throughout the discussion, but I tried very hard not to be like armchair psychologist or like armchair clinician too much. Like I really tried to in reading the book, I tried to think about what his experiences are saying, what is the environment he's describing saying, what is he saying about the experiences and how it helped him develop or hurt his development or shaped his development, and tried not to play, oh, if only this or if only that, because I really didn't want to spend too much time. I think it's important for us to do it to some extent, but spend too much time just doing that. Oh, if only there had been services, or if only he'd gotten a diagnosis. I think there are some interesting points that we can sort of go over in terms of like the general scope of, how environments shape behavior and how that can be good, that can be bad. But I really didn't want to think too much like, oh, he could have had a better life. And I did find myself saying that times like, oh, if only the note, I bet he would have had so many more friends. And I don't think that was the goal of writing the book. He mentioned that he certainly wished he'd had more friends, that he wished some of the things he knew now he'd known then, but it wasn't my place to say like, well, I'm a clinician and I could tell you that you should have had these things. So I did find that being a pitfall I fell into a lot of trying to be like, what if, and it was like, not my place. This guy had a life. he's happy with his life. He's just writing a book about, how his life went, and that's the life he had. Like, I can't go back, and if I spend too much time opining on it, I'm just going to learn the wrong lesson, which is, look at me, I can change people who aren't neurotypical, which is not what he wants, and not what I want either, but it's
if anything, I tried to think about how I, as a clinician, want to avoid some of those pitfalls, because like his anecdotes about like his mother and pranking her with like making his brother go missing. Well, is that attention? Is that like what if our dry 4 categories of function? This doesn't, there's more to it. There's nuance in this behavior.
I'm going to FA this memoir.
Yeah, right. But that's like what we're supposed. That's what would we do by the book? We would do dry functional analysis. Like, there's nuance here, and like there's like a culture within his family that has issues, but he's interacting socially with people in a way that he is finding successful and unsuccessful. And so just trying to think of like, well, how would I, if I had a client that, maybe was doing some social skills work on, how would I be like, all right, well, I want to respect your autonomy, but maybe find some like better ways to do these things. Have a better relationship with your mom that it doesn't involve like making her think that your brother has gone missing or walked off with some adult man.
The mom also didn't seem very concerned though. So, I mean,
yeah,
it was a different time.
It was a different time.
Mandatory
it's a baby boomer memoir.
Mandatory reporter throughout the book.
I was just going to add, and maybe we'll talk about it later, but I want to make sure I say that in his self-reflection, looking back on his life, he does talk about how, he's changed over the course of his life. And he says, I've become more social. I'm able to navigate these relationships a lot better now. But he views it as a trade-off for him, right? And he
that
says,
was sad.
well, all of us, like, you got only so many neural pathways.
I know.
And
the file
let's be
is
honest.
full.
Yeah.
they're dying off. And he's saying that he was able, and we'll talk all about the amazing and fascinating things he did in life he had, but the way that he, put his energies toward those types of activities, he said it's different for him now. He doesn't think he would be able to do that again because he's worked so hard at these other tasks. So I don't think he sees one as better than the other.
Didn't seem like it, because he did say,
Right.
Now he's learned these more skills. He's able to move more fluently in the world, right? So that's an advantage, because now he feels less lonely, right? Where he said that before, he was like, I had my engineer, my materials, my gadgets, but they couldn't talk back to me, right? Which is a good thing and a bad thing.
Yeah, but he made some amazing stuff.
I can't even imagine going back and looking at something and being like, did I make that?
Well, I do that every time I write something.
Yeah, anything. If I've never made anything, and I
Did I write this? I have no recollection.
I listen to podcast episodes and I'm like, who's this? Man, that guy sounded like he really was paying attention to the articles. I don't know what he's talking about.
Maybe that's me too. Maybe I just don't have as much awareness as y'all.
Well, don't worry, Jackie. There's hundreds and hundreds of hours you could listen to of yourself saying things.
That's true, actually.
That's right. You're recorded for posterity, man. Anyone can now just go back and listen.
Oh, and see my evolution?
Yeah.
Let's go do a deep analysis of the skill development of
Jackie McDonald
Jackie
specifically.
McDonald.
So anyway, I think, I obviously don't want to speak for him, but I don't think that we should be thinking like, what could have changed for him, right? Because then he would have missed out on some of the amazing things that he did.
Yeah, I think it's more, what could other people in his life have done? Not even just like to help him, but just to be respectful of him, to let things go.
Sure.
I mean, I'm thinking of so many of the chapters, high school was such hell for him in so many ways, because he just had so many more teachers who just seemed to hate him. Just, why are you doing that? It's so annoying. Like, they were just annoyed by him. And I wish I could say, oh man, it's been 20 years since I've seen a teacher who was like, that kid annoys me and I'm going to let everyone know it. It hasn't been. I mean, it's less than when I started my career, but like I don't think a year goes by where you don't have that sense of like, oh, for whatever reason, maybe no one's trying to be a bad person, but there's a rub. And as the adult, I'm wondering why they're not stepping back and saying, you know what? I don't have to let this bother me. It's not a big deal in the grand scheme of things. I bet I can find something positive about this learner. It just won't happen. But it feels like that was every teacher, almost every teacher for him. Like
it was also a different time too, right?
Yeah.
Also
Yes.
a different time.
I think also just gleaning like what about my current clients, thinking about this man and knowing that his perspective on autism is more genuine and real and authentic than mine ever can be.
Right.
But I'm informing decisions for someone who is autistic, then I need like a whole catalog, sort of like what Jackie was saying at the beginning, a whole catalog of memoirs and experiences.
Yeah.
Like, this feels very similar, share an anecdote or a resource to share with parents.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I had a really scampish, troublemaking like young man, I might be like, well, let's read this. Like, let's read some content from this book to like talk about why he was doing this and what can we learn. Because I think even talking like what if or what might have happened if people in his life were different, that's not necessarily that helpful either because they didn't and can't. But knowing what changes can I make now going forward, that is useful.
Mm-hmm. I always feel like when there's like a memoir or there's a movie about someone with a disability or someone who's neurodivergent, someone different than the quote unquote the norm, that there's a segment of people who take that media, whatever it is, in, and they sort of just get dewy-eyed and talk about the triumph, and they're like proud of the individual who wrote it. And that always leaves me feeling very gross. Like I don't like that as like if you have that feeling, I guess you have that feeling. But I kind of feel like if you went up
that feeling.
Yeah, if you went up to John Elder Robison and said, "Oh, your book! Oh, it was so inspiring! What a triumph! I can't believe you!" I feel like he would not have it. I don't think he'd be rude about it.
No, he might be rude.
He might be rude about it. You said he was. I think he was pretty direct about like that's not why I wrote that. That's not what I wanted to feel.
Frank about it, not rude about it.
Yes.
Like,
Not
if
rude,
you
it
were
would
walking
just
up to him, he does not have to be polite.
I appreciate you read my book. That's not what I wanted you to read from it.
Yeah.
You should read it again. Like that's not the point. But then I sometimes feel like I'm like, am I just being like mean or cynical?
No.
Okay, good. Then I'm right. Okay, good.
You're not right, but you're not being.
No, I liked it when you said I was right, Jackie.
You're right.
We'll edit that out. Just
All
go
right.
to the right part.
Let's move on to this book.
Let's do it. Okay, so before we get into the book itself, just kind of to wrap up the intro section, I looked up a little bit more information. So for those of you who don't know what book this is, it was published in 2007. Some fun stuff.
But actually, again, I have the 2008 version.
Oh, you have the 2008 version.
So it published in 2007, republished in 2008.
Yes.
With a
we sprung for the hardcover edition.
I bought it used, man.
With a postscript to the paperback edition.
I didn't have a postscript.
That's the 2008 version.
Okay,
So
but I
the
did.
2008 version has a postscript.
But you know what I did do? You know what I did do, though? I did look up John Elder Robison's LinkedIn page to find out more about what he's been up to. Because I know you said he came and he spoke at Regis, and I said, well, he doesn't just do like book tours, right? So since writing this, he's gone on to certainly do a lot of work for advocacy work. He was on the board of the International Society for Autism Research. He's on the advisory board for the Autism Center of Excellence at UC Davis. He's the neurodiversity scholar in residence at the College of William and Mary.
That's how he came to Regis.
That's how. That's where I figured it was. I mean, he still has his company, his auto shop.
He does?
I believe so.
Oh, good.
He also co-founded an auto program, which is a high school program for teens with challenges. It says he worked for a couple years on a board of the Department of Health and Human Services, and he's continued to write books. He's written some of his further books. He wrote a book about raising his son, raising Cubby, who he mentions at the end of the book, who is a child.
So cute. I love those anecdotes.
But he is not a child anymore. He's now an adult. He's like,
an adult.
Right. he's probably, I think he's probably like around your age, Alan, or a little older than you actually. Who then, also had his own challenges as an adolescent.
Alan, how old are you?
Alan doesn't have to say on the podcast how old he is if he doesn't want to.
As a side note, you can tell.
Alan,
I'm
blink how
34.
many times you're old.
Blink. You're 34? Okay.
Yeah.
So just for also background, this Robison was born in 1957.
Mhm.
This book was written in 2007, so it was written when he was 50.
And he has had life
now,
since then.
yes, and he's still been experiencing life since then. So he's now like 65.
He's got to write a sequel.
Yeah.
That's what we're thinking. Wait a couple more years. He also wrote about his experience where he did, it was what is it called? Switched On, which was a book about he did some like a neurological treatment that was supposed to like help his brain and how it like, changed how he thought about things or felt about things. And then he also had a book called Be Different, which was sort of just general like statements about being an Aspergian and what that means for him and how that can be a positive
And that's
thing.
his term, by the way.
That's his term that he uses in the book. Yeah, that I should be clear. Not everyone's going to want to use that term. That is the term he uses to refer to himself in the book. I don't know if he still uses it, though, to describe himself.
I don't know.
I read some of his posts that he's written since then or in the past few years or in like the late 10s and the 2020. And I think he's using more of the sort of, autism kind of diagnosis umbrella.
Spectrum.
Yeah, more spectrum.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, at the time the book was written, Asperger's was still a diagnosis in the DSM-4 in 2013. The DSM-5 came out, which no one is now receiving an Asperger's diagnosis anymore. It's all just underneath the umbrella of autism. But folks who previously had that diagnosis can keep it if they want to. But most people don't call themselves Aspergian. That is his term. So just to make sure everyone's clear on that.
And it was relatively easy to find some of his recent posts on neurodiversity and on differences and the importance of differences online, and they read very much like his memoirs. He's very, very good writer. It's like very he talks about it in the book too. Is one of the reasons he thinks he was great at running his garage, in that he gets to the point and he's precise and he explains things in a way that other people can understand. I think that's very true about his work, in advocacy and in his other writings.
Looking at his most recent introduction for the IACC, it's I'm an autistic adult. I have autism. I embrace the neurodiversity movement. Mm-hmm. There's not a lot of references to Asperger.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. So
but at the time,
so that's what was referred in the book. But we'll just use autistic to describe it, as needed in the conversation. All right. So with that out of the way, that's our intro. Let's get into a little bit more deep dive in the book. We hope you enjoyed listening to this preview of the Look Me in the Eye book club from all of us here at ABA Inside Track. Like I said at the top, if you want to hear the full audio, head on over to patreon.com/ABA Inside Track and subscribe at the $10 up level to get access to that, 2 CEs for listening, plus access to all of our previous book clubs and CEs at no additional charge. We really enjoy doing these seasonal book clubs. We get a lot out of reading the books, and we hope you get a lot out of hearing the discussions and maybe even inspire you to pick up the books yourselves. But in the meantime, thanks for listening to this preview. We'll be back with another of our episodes very shortly. Until then, keep responding. Bye.